This proposed legislation, an act relative to anti-racism, equity, and justice in education, H584 and S365. This is a very, very important tool for us to begin to dismantle white supremacy. And to talk about the bill, I'm very happy to introduce Erica. Are you here? Very happy to introduce State Representative Erica Uyterhoeven.
I'm here.
Okay, oh great.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Welcome. So Erica is one of my favorite people and one of my favorite public servants. She is the state representative for the 27th Middlesex District from Somerville. Erica grew up in Wayland, Massachusetts, and is the proud daughter of her mom, Yoshi, who immigrated from Japan and raised her on her own. Throughout Erica's upbringing, Yoshi immersed her daughter in the Japanese language, culture, and heritage, which has shaped Erica's commitment and path to social, economic, and racial justice today. Prior to running for state representative, Erica co-founded Acton Mass, that incredible grassroots organization, an advocacy organization fighting for transparency, public accountability, and good democracy at the Massachusetts State House. Erica formerly worked in antitrust and labor economics and worked on campaigns locally in Massachusetts, nationally, and abroad. Erica is a graduate of Wayland High School, Wellesley College, and Harvard Business School. Yay, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. I actually wanted to just say a few words because Vivian, your last slide on, there's no democracy without racial justice. I just wanted to echo that really quickly because it's just so deep in the work that we've done and the work that we'll continue to do in that it really reminds me of something that I've been reflecting on a lot, which is on James Baldwin's life. And I've been reading this wonderful book called Begin Again. So highly recommend it because he goes into sort of how, James Baldwin is really known for calling witness to what he calls the lie of American democracy. And that lie is what is steeped in white supremacy. And it's this idea that we can both have democracy, but then also for white supremacy to exist, we need to believe that a certain group of people, right, are below others, right? And you need to have that belief system. And so to me, the work that we do with Acton Mass, with my work in the State House, it is constantly challenging that in order to protect and build the democracy that we believe in. So I just wanted to really uplift that because that slide and your words, Vivian, really resonated. But I wanted to just start by really expressing gratitude for everyone here, to Indivisible Acton and CORE, and welcoming me to your organizing home. And, I really just can't say enough that, back when I got to see you all in person, I really just have so much love for Indivisible Acton because there's this fire in everyone's belly that just deeply resonates with me. But also, that's something that I used to do a lot of reading on research on like what builds long-lasting organizing capacity in groups and community organizations. And one key piece across many studies, it comes up every single time of successful organizing capacity building organizations, is that the group knows how to have fun and knows how to celebrate their collective power. And I have to say, Indivisible Acton, every time, whether it's the Zumba and the celebrations, I just really can't wait to be in the same space as you all again, and to celebrate our collective realized organizing power, right? So really thank you. And I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge that in this bill, an act relative to anti-racism, equity, and justice in public education, to really center on both young people of color, our elders of color, and all of our community members who have been organizing vigorously through this pandemic, because this work started before I was elected, and truly words can't describe how much hope that their work and the way they built coalitions across the state, across various BIPOC groups, pulling in Indigenous folks, Black, Latinx, Asian American, as well as building bridges across all parts of the education justice organizing space has just been something that really nourishes me every day, to be building this intergenerational movement, because this work is truly generational, right? When we think about education and our youth and what we hand down to our youth, it really centers on honoring generations that have come before us, but then also our love for generations that are coming after us and centering on what we want to hand over to them. So I just wanted to take a moment to honor that. And as well, I just always want to say too, particularly when we're talking about, white supremacy, racism, these are all things that I always want to center that I want to send out love and solidarity to everyone who's grappling with these issues, and because this has truly been just a challenging year for our communities in so many ways. And a core part of my identity, as I said, is a second generation Asian American. Just to be upfront, the past few months have really been marked by trauma, but also revelation and deep reflection. So I just wanted to send out love to anyone who's hurting, right? That we are all in this together, and we are here to heal, organize, and dismantle and build together. So I just wanted to share before I dive in, because I wanted to share a little more about this bill and kind of how it became to be, right? And what's in this bill, right? And what does it mean to challenge systemic racism? I always try to start with, because this work is just so centered on our identities and our stories, right? And that's actually what is core to ethnic studies, which is a key part of this bill, centering on ethnic studies, is this unfolding, examining, and reflecting on our identities and how white supremacy impacts those identities, as well as challenging our privileges, right? And confronting proactively systemic racism. But it really does just start with our lived experience. And so, I've grown up second generation Japanese immigrant, raised by my single mom, and how I've experienced anti-Asian racism is both about anti-Asian hate, but also anti-Asian erasure, or say Asian American erasure, right? And I think Vivian, by sharing all the slides she did, really kind of highlighted that, right? These are things we don't get to learn in our schools, and that is a form of erasure. And that erasure, what it means is that, our humanity, our lived experiences, our pain, our ambitions to be whole citizens of this country is not even acknowledged. And something that, I think about a lot, especially over the past few months, is it took this brutal murder, this hate crime of unspeakable magnitude in Atlanta for America to pause and begin to see anti-Asian racism and hate for what it was. And so I think the most important way is to really kind of, again, share with you all sort of that personal experience. And I grew up here in Massachusetts, and my earliest memory was playing outside of Red Barn, my preschool, and I remember seeing my mom's white Buick pull up, and she rolled down her window smiling, and she shouted, "Erika, ishoni kaero," which means, "Erika, it's time to go home together." And I was so excited to see her because she works full time. It's not every day she gets to come pick me up. So I dropped my toy I was playing with, and I ran over to hug her when a boy screamed loudly at my mom, imitating and mocking my mom's English. He pulled back both sides of his face to make fun of her eyes, and I froze. And I don't remember this part clearly, but my mom told me recently that in that moment at 4 years old, when we got in the car, I consoled her and told her it's going to be okay, and that it's okay she doesn't speak English like me. And so from a young age, we really are taught to survive white supremacy. You assimilate in school, work hard, don't speak up, fit this disgustingly narrow mold, laugh it off and smile when someone says it's not fair. You're only good at math because you're Asian. Ignore it when a classmate tells you that their grandparents don't want you at their house because you're Japanese. Work hard and hope that the next generation won't have to deal with this, only to realize that our youth and our elders are getting attacked for spreading the China virus, perpetuated by none other than our president. Thousands of incidents of these hate crimes are reported last year, and twice as many incidents are reported by women than men. And we know that this is all a gross underreporting. And I share this story because I know that my story is also not unique, right? Much of the research shows that young people experience racism and develop racial identity at a very young age, between 3 to 6 years old. And at this age, I learned about this from, actually, I'm going to share another book. I'm big on books. This book on racial hearing by Annalise Singh. And she shares about how at this age, your frontal lobe is not developed yet. And your frontal lobe is where, all the personality and critical thinking is. And at that age, that part of your brain is unfolding, right, and developing. And it's this beautiful moment. But then what happens to young people is that they truly feel racism. And that sense of racism is felt on this very deep level. And young people they don't have the words for it yet, but they can feel it. And as parents, caregivers, educators, or anyone who cares for young people witness this feeling and see how destabilizing and traumatizing it is firsthand, even at such a young age, even these sort of small incidents, what seems seemingly small incidents of realizing, and seeing that happen to young people. So that's why for me, this bill, which is H.584, an act relative to anti-racism, equity, and justice in education, is so important because it is trying to change systematically these issues in publication, to make proactive, right, to center on identities and to really introduce ethnic studies into our curriculum. And I want to also just shout out, this is, we introduced this as a team with Rep. Nika Eligardo, as well as Senator Jason Lewis, who's the chair of the Education Committee. And this bill, just to share a little more details on it, is to set up a commission for anti-racism and equity in education. And this commission is going to be tasked with two main pieces, which is one, to develop curriculum materials with a social justice perspective of dismantling racism, and then to advise the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which I'll call DESE from now. It's basically the state level agency that handles education, on improving the history and social sciences framework. And the second piece, which I've said a lot, I know I've said this word a lot, which is around ensuring that ethnic studies, which again is this exploration of identity and how our identities and lived experience interact with white supremacy, racial justice, decolonizing history, and unlearning racism is taught at all grade levels, right, using a critical approach and pedagogy that is age appropriate. So in summary, this commission will cover systemic changes in public education. And I just want to say a few words about what systemic change would need to look like, right? Because I think, we want to teach the, kind of the explicit parts, right? This white-centric curriculum is kind of the first thing we see on the top layer, right? We can see it right away. What are we teaching our students? And it's the most explicit and identifiable way it shows up, but it's so much more deeper than that because it shows up in our curriculum implicitly. And in so many ways, BIPOC students hear this message from their peers, from the educators, right, from the whole system, that they are less than or that they are other. So it means when we say systemic change, when we have to answer the question kind of like, where does white supremacy show up in schools? And how does it show up? Because it's much more beyond, right, the white-centric curriculum. And it starts to draw more questions around, how does it show up in our recruitment of educators, right? Our hiring. What kind of questions are we asking educators? Are we asking questions like, how will you teach, right? And how do you center on identities and the ethnicities of students? How teachers are evaluated, right? And on an even deeper level, right? What are teacher ed programs teaching us or preparing teachers with, right? What are the mandatory courses? And something I hear time and time again, particularly from BIPOC educators, is they're like, took a lot of courses, some of them were useful, some of them weren't, but I never had to take a course on racial equity, never had to take a course on ethnic studies, and that needs to change, right? So this is what I mean by like the systemic piece of this. Which education theorists are they learning from? Are they all white education theorists, or are we talking about education theorists that really take this ethnic studies and racial justice lens? And so that's really kind of what this, this sort of systemic change requires, right? And then we can start to also ask questions, right, of how much are we including things like API history, Black history, Latinx, and Indigenous history? Because if that's not incorporated, it comes up in all these different ways. And also I'll share too, just another piece is it comes up, right, in our standardized tests, state standards. It's an entire system that doesn't center on BIPOC students' histories or identities. And so that's why this piece, setting up the commission, was a really key part of this, because it will continually push for change, right, with DESE, right, working with school committees, working with, superintendents, working with school districts to make those changes step by step, because it's not something that we're going to be able to do in sort of a one-shot deal, like, setting in place like clear parameters. It's going to be this ongoing piece of how and who is teaching our students. And so that's why, for me, the key part of the commission's mission is to tackle this entire system. And, that includes, right, again, educators, teachers, school counselors, having access to professional development, right, that fosters equitable, inclusive curriculums and pedagogies, and, practices that support racial justice, because it's going to take kind of taking and handling all those pieces of that. I also just share too that, again, when I talk about systemic change, as I mentioned before, right, the commission's also going to be advising DESE on the ways to ensure equity in the MTEL, right, which is the educator's licensure exam, right? What kind of questions are MTEL asking? Are they questions around, right, these issues that we want educators to be equipped with, right? What are the, and also how does this test serve as a racialized barrier, right? Because that's another piece too, is that standardized tests serve as these barriers, particularly for educators of color. So these are all these kind of pieces that are required for systemic change. I also want to share too that another piece of the systemic change part of the commission is going to advise DESE on how to support and promote efforts to increase and support and retain educators of color, right? Oh, thank you, Christine. I got you. Make sure you know. And support and retain educators of color in the public school workforce, right? Because it's not by accident that we have an overwhelmingly, right, disproportionately white educator workforce, right? That wasn't an accident. That is steeped in our history in Massachusetts. And it's going to take proactively undoing that to move forward. So I think I'm going to wrap up there because I think we're running out of time, but I just wanted to share how excited I am to be sharing this space with you all, to share this bill with you all, as well as I know so many people here have been organizing and building this coalition, right, and this statewide organizing effort across various BIPOC groups that I really just want to appreciate and lift up. So thank you all so much, and I'll pass it over to Christine.
Don't go yet. Don't go yet.
Right here.
There's
Yeah.
2 questions in the chat. I think.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. So one is, how will the commission be chosen? Who will be on the commission?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So and that's actually really key to the question, like, who is at the table? And that's something that was one of the really big demands when we were drafting this bill, is who is going to be on this commission, right? And that representation is going to be with BIPOC-led community organizations and advocacy groups in partnership with teachers unions, right? The Massachusetts Association of Superintendents, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. But really, we wanted to make sure that there was a seat for Indigenous people, Asian Americans, Latinx, African American Institutes of UMass Boston, right, ACLU and faith groups, as well as having representatives from LGBTQ youth and parent representatives. So really making sure, because these issues around racial justice are intersectional, right? They intersect with religion, with LGBTQ issues, gender, class, right? So we really wanted to make sure that that commission was not just, I'm going to say it really bluntly, Governor Baker's appointees, right? Someone finds racist, right? Like, we know what this is. It's called tokenism, as well as, right, there's, I'll just also name, right, part of this piece that is deeply intertwined with racial justice and education is this push to privatize education. And that there has been actually, through this bill writing process, right, a push to say, why don't we have these groups that are kind of have Latino in their name, but they're funded by, groups that have been pushing to privatize public schools. And we were absolutely like, no, this needs to be based in community organizing, right? And not in what I'll call bad actors, right? Because my belief is that when people are pushing to privatize schools, it is deeply rooted in our racial justice history, because it is saying that we can leave some kids behind, right? It is saying that we are going to profit off of the differences, between the deficiencies, assumed deficiencies of students of color. So I won't go, I know I kind of hit a very big topic there, so if I want to answer more questions.
It's a big topic and we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
And another member makes a great point, is that, and we see this in the Healthy Youth Act too, is that some school districts are working on it and trying to do something, but it's very uneven, and it would be so nice to make it standard throughout the state. And as a former educator, I truly appreciate materials and training, right? Because I remember I taught in New Jersey, and I hadn't lived there as a child, and they said, okay, now you're going to teach New Jersey history. I'm like, okay, where's the book? because I didn't grow up here. And they're like, you're just supposed to do it. And I'm like, okay. So
And kind of related to that, I mean, another big like demand that we had as part of this and that we're working on really fighting for is around resources, right? To Christina, right? Because it would be totally, this is something that Professor Watanabe, who was a, who works on ethnic studies, he stated, it would be completely wild if someone said, you want to teach calculus? Well, go fundraise the money.
Yeah,
there you go. Get some grassroots donations, and then we'll teach calculus, right?
Get a volunteer math teacher to come in and share about their experiences. Yeah.
Just figure out. You don't have a textbook. You just like learn on your free time, and then you'll bring it into the classroom, right? So it is really important that we're putting hard resources, as well as something that we're doing here in Somerville that I'm hoping we, again, this is something that the commission will tackle with when it's formed, is that they're giving educators like clear time to dedicate to that. So they're teaching half workload so that they can work on racial justice issues. Because there's this presumption that somehow we're just going to do it on our free time, right? With no resources, with no actual, capacity. And so that's something that's a really key part, is around the resources piece as well. So,
Well, I'm so excited for this bill, and maybe Representative Uyterhoeven, you want to put your email in the chat.
I love that.
And if people want, and we'll talk later at the end of the program how to join the people working on this. And thank you so much for speaking tonight. And Indivisible Acton Area sends love back. We wish we could clone you. We love it so much. We're going to work on that next. We're going to